What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. I am Josh Hayes. We're here with Scott Moon and Ralph Kern, and hopefully that transition went extremely well. And as you can see, we're already messing it up because I forgot to do the transition back so you could see me. But hello, good evening, and welcome to hopefully a new and better, more impressed.
That's awesome.
I don't know.
I like the time space warp continuum, and then I didn't hear the music, and then all of a sudden I hear you talking. I'm like, did I miss something?
Yep.
But now I'm here. Yeah. Now I'm watching the past. In the past, you were talking, and then we had 8 visitors.
I'm not. It's
more eyes are coming on.
It's very disconcerting. So, welcome.
Ken McClellan. Ken says, "Hi guys, Rick's here. Kayleen, Blake, everybody, gang's pouring in."
Yeah. Well, hopefully this will work out as well as we hope. We'll see. We'll see if it works. If it doesn't, then we'll always have YouTube. So, welcome everybody, and hopefully we don't crash the internet. So, just don't crash the internet, okay, guys? Can we just agree on that? Can we agree not to crash the internet?
I promise that, but Scott, can you?
I cannot promise that. I will break anything and I'm trying to answer some of the chats.
Welcome,
anyway, yeah, no, I will. I guarantee I will break it if it can be broken, because that's what I do.
I love the way you're moving like some kind of horror movie, kind of stop motion character at the moment.
That's what everybody else said on the Facebook. I'm really jerky on our actual live stream. There, it seems like.
Well, no, you're jerky on my end too. So I don't know if it's something with your connection.
I'm smooth as butter on mine.
Yeah, I don't know, because Ralph is really smooth and I'm really smooth. Well, obviously Ralph is smooth. So,
and obviously you are as well, John.
Well, I mean, come on. That's
Should we get a room later?
Yeah. Yes, I'll come there, because I'm sure that would be a lot funner to hang out than you and Candace.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah, well, everybody's finding it okay. That's good. Looks like it's working, and
Rick says the connection is janky. Is that just me?
I don't know if he's talking about everybody's connection, or if it's just...
I guess we're going to find out.
If it's just
we should probably move into something really cool so that people stay with us.
What have you been up to this week, Scott? Anything fun? Anything new and exciting?
I got a brand new computer.
Yes, you did get a new computer.
Yeah, I did. And then I didn't send a video out to everybody, but first thing I did is my 7-year-old made a video of me dropping the empty box down the stairs like I just got the computer, because that's my MO. If I would get a brand new computer, then drop it and break it. But it's working great so far. A huge story behind it. It's just
it actually would not surprise me if you dropped your computer and broke it.
I know. Yeah. It's very scary.
Yet tried to overcome it somehow by just setting it up anyway. The broken scud, the crack across the screen.
Someday you'll find me just typing away in a room full of broken computers that don't work.
He's gonna go. You really need to go back to like a typewriter.
Yeah, I won't even be making words. That be like he
page.
thinks he's writing books, but he's just typing on that keyboard that's not plugged in. We feed him every now and then and change his diaper, so just be good. I find it horribly unfair that my connection's all jickety jankety, because it was fine a minute ago.
It's actually smoothed out quite nicely now. You can.
Oh, good.
You can come hang out with me and Josh now.
I can be part of
we probably
you're all
go that
silky.
Silky.
I heard
smooth.
three's a crowd.
He's
what are we talking
fuzzy.
about tonight?
He's not fuzzy. He's furry.
I do want to say one thing, though, is the reason I have a computer is because of the generosity of somebody that we all know. It's one of those things where this person, I'm not mentioning gender and stuff because I learned that at work, how to not reveal who somebody is or whatever. But a benefactor saw that I was in distress and sent me this computer before I even asked. And I was like, what are you doing? And I found out, and it's kind of a karma thing. And I mean, I can't be thankful enough. It's good to have people that help out like that. So someday I'll have to pass that along when I can. So very thankful. the person who sent this to me knows who that person is.
So on that note, that's very neat because, the community is kind of why we do this. Well, it's probably the number one reason we do this show and why Keystroke Medium exists. And so Scott and I and Ralph and Lauren and Kayleen and Chuck, we're all about giving back and, just doing stuff for writers and not being that Scrooge McDuck sitting in a corner, just swimming in our money because we have no money to swim in. But it's really cool just to see that the people that watch the show, the people that hang out with us, kind of return and pay it forward, as it were, kind of everything we're trying to do with the company. So that's really neat. Ralph, you're on vacation this week, man. How is your writing gone?
What time is it in Mallorca anyway?
It is 8 minutes past 3 in the morning. So if I suddenly
really early,
time to get up and write.
If you suddenly see me doze off, that's why. It's been an interesting vacation so far. So yeah, we've managed to do a bit of writing. So got my laptop over here, which managed to crank out some word counts. But I think probably the weirdest stroke, oddest stroke, just bizarre thing. So Caroline, my other half, bought me a paragliding session for my birthday this year, which was
awesome.
Which was great. Love it. I don't know whether you can read something of that. She paid for me to throw myself off the side of a mountain.
Was there a coyote involved in this story? Because I think it'd be better with a coyote.
No, but there are beasts involved in it.
I bet.
So,
let's get to it.
So anyway, obviously, being paragliding, we had to go up to the top of the mountain. So we jumped in our hire car, drove up, and as you can imagine, it went from regular roads to sort of like a dirt track kind of thing. We're in this hire car, and we're like, we're kind of chicaning our way up. So got all these switchbacks to go up the mountain. It's slowly getting rougher and rougher and rougher as we get to the top. And at the top is where an antenna mast is for a radio station or for specialist services the whole of Mallorca. And the paragliding guys meeting us at the top there. And we get all the way to the top. And it's like all the way. It's at least a 30-degree angle. It's the little Ford Fiesta thing we got as a hire car is completely not adequate for the job. And it proved to be the case when we got about 99% of the way to the top, and then suddenly the tire pressure warning, and the car just sort of went, no. It's like blowout, massive blowout, and so suddenly the tire started went bang, and we look out, and I'm like, oh shit. Yeah. So
is that like karma?
Yeah, I'm just like, great, and get out the car, and I'm looking out over this beautiful vista. It's like we're on the top of a mountain overlooking a gorgeous bay, crystal blue waters, and I've got like a broken car, and see the paragliding guy there, and he's basically Point Break. For the purpose of the story, we'll call him Point Break.
He's
basically Patrick Swayze, and he's there on his
Patrick fucking Swayze.
He's there on his little scrambler with his paragliding set, in a huge backpack, probably like your backpack that you carry around all your bomb gear in.
Oh, indeed,
it's absolutely massive.
Mm-hmm.
And he's basically like, "Wow, that looks shit, doesn't it?" I'm like, "Yeah, it does." You kind of, and I'm like thinking, suddenly you get into some kind of problem-solving mode. How do you overcome this? No recovery truck is going to come up to the top of the mountain to sort your car out.
Well, you're committed. You're going to have to go.
So I think, all right, okay, we'll man up here. We'll change the tyre. And we open up the boot and lift up the shroud, and there's the spare tyre in there. Lift it up. And now, it being a hire car company, they've removed the wrench. So you have to use
that's so awesome.
So I'm at the top of a mountain with just a spare tire and no wrench to actually change it. I'm like, fortunately, they got like the jack. Anyway, Point Break's like, right, you see that village right across there, and he like points across, and like you there doing the old looking at forest
over yonder.
It's like, yeah, that's tire replacements today. Don't worry, I'll go get you a new wrench. And we're like, oh, thanks, sir. So he gets on his scrambler, he's there, like wheeling off, and he like dives down, goes and gets a wrench. Like half an hour later, he comes back up, and
Wrong side.
and it's like, okay, like now problem number 2 is that we're on top of a mountain, and you need somewhere relatively flat to sort out your sort out your tire. And it's like, oh, over there's flat. So literally the only flat place on this mountain, like kind of like freewheel myself into it, and it's just like a hornet nest is right next to it. So they're not just like kind of like tiny little things.
I love where this story is going. I really do. I mean, it started out I thought I knew where it was going, and then it's a huge twist to get it right over there.
So I was like there, and I'm like, like I'm manning up through this whole experience, and I'm like, sort of jacking it up, and I'm changing the tire. The guy keeps coming over, and there's one point where he comes over and just says, I probably should just warn you, I'm massively allergic to hornets. I'm like, can you back the fuck off? Because if all goes well, I'm going to be throwing myself on the mountain with you in tandem, and you're the one controlling the paraglide.
While he's all swollen up with hornet bites.
So I really don't want to have an EpiPen in one hand, dangling from a paraglider in the other.
Isn't that like a required thing, having an EpiPen while you're hang gliding?
I always carry 2 or 3 just in case I run into somebody that needs it. So
that would have been epic. Unfortunately, like once it all been resolved, and we got ourselves to the actual launch point, which was only a few, probably about 50 meters above where we were, and he goes and he does the old. Sorry, mate, the wind's out. Like,
and so you didn't even get to go paragliding.
Went through all that for nothing. So we like.
What I thought was really interesting about that whole thing is while he's doing it, he's texting our collective group, and he's like, "What do you guys think, death or glory?" Because we were talking about whether or not he was going to die in this deal. I voted for death. I don't know what anybody else voted for, but he came back like 30 minutes. What was it, like an hour and a half later, and you're like, yeah, we didn't get any. I didn't die, and I didn't get any glory.
Well, I love the
always
way
choose
it's like when you say like something or something else on Facebook, it automatically creates a little poll. And I was like,
really?
It's just set up as poll. Death, glory. Like, everyone's just like, death.
Not that we ever would wish any harm on you ever, really.
No. We would never do that. We care. We're good partners in the co-hosting things like that.
Yeah. You just want to know the guy who threw himself off the mountain. The guy who's had a massive anaphylactic shock.
I knew that guy.
And then
he hated wasps.
And then he died.
Anyway, by a vicious wasp sting.
Anyway, Josh, how was your day?
Well, my day, actually, I was very disappointed yesterday. Yesterday, I got 5,000 words, which is I think more words in a day. I haven't got 5,000 words in a day for probably like 2 or 3 months. And when I punched them into my my yearly or my spreadsheet for the year for words, and what are we on? We're on September 10th. So I have more words in September already than I had the entire month of July. And
July was a tough month.
July was the worst month ever. But then I'm sitting back yesterday, and of course it's Sunday, and my normal days off are Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So I'm sitting there, and I got my 5,000 words, and I'm like, oh, I nailed it. I'm gonna do the same thing tomorrow. I'm gonna get babysitters coming over. I guess I could put an alien coyote in the story, but. I was sitting there, and I got all these things done. I got like 2 chapters done. I got this all set up, and I was ready to go. And I'm getting ready for bed, and my wife is like, you have bomb stuff tomorrow, right? And I looked at her, and I'm like, no. I've got bomb stuff tomorrow. I can't write. And I was completely like, oh my God, that sucks so bad. Like, and most of the time I'd be like, hell yeah, I got bomb stuff tomorrow.
Blow stuff up.
But then I was all like set, ready to go for another $5,000 day, and just the wind was taken completely out of my sails, and I was very disappointed.
That's a killer.
But I got up and I got 1,300 words anyway. So
that's
anyway,
still a solid day's writing.
And they were on Edge of Valor, which now I have almost 13,000 words on, and it's flowing very well. So. And
I cannot wait to read that book. The way you like, we've obviously all shot the proverbial shit about it, and it sounds so awesome. Can't wait to.
So what's really crazy about that book is I was looking at sometime. I know that I made basically a star chart because I had to map out how many days. For like travel times
across
between
the Coyote sector.
Yes, it takes 9 days to cross the Coyote sector of the galaxy, and so I know that I had this map somewhere. So I'm searching my computers, I'm searching all my external drives. Found it nowhere. But what I did find was my original scaffold planning document for the story. I started planning this back in 2014. That's how long like this story has been like rolling around in my head, damn near 4.5 years, and I'm finally starting to sit down and put
I think I remember you telling me that car to car at Newmarket where you were telling me about
at Newmarket, because that's where I had the idea.
Yeah, I remember talking about that. Good ideas take the time to germinate. We should do a show sometime on the creative process and how sometimes you get blocked on something and then you or have to abandon the story, and then like 5 years later it's just like boom, falls into place.
Oh, speaking of having a show with a topic, should we move into our
we have a topic?
It was a great segue by me. I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm a professional when it comes to segues on this show.
Seguer?
Yes.
We should buy you a Segway in honor of your segues.
I could ride a Segway while we're on the show talking about segues.
Segueing.
Right. Segueing.
No, just segueing. So you could segue from the right side of the screen to the left.
Yes.
Introduce the
topic. We can segue.
And say you reach the midpoint, what would you call out for this particular
I would
show?
just yell segue. Just segue.
You should have a war cry.
Yeah.
Show me
we were talking
your
about
segue face.
Yeah. We were talking about topics for this week's episode, and we always love doing roundtables because we get to talk about whatever the hell we want. And world building popped into my head, and I thought that it was a good kind of continuation on, like we've talked about good endings and good beginnings. And I don't know that we've talked about middles yet, but world building kind of fits into that middle portion of the book. And hey, Chuck's here. Welcome, Chuck. Finally, the intern.
It's Chucko.
Chuck.
Hello. Apologies for my tardiness, everyone. Are we live on the Facebooks?
We are.
Technically, yes.
I do notice that I tried to get in and make some comments on the Facebook page to respond to some people's questions, and that screwed me all up because it turned on the volume, and that's got a delay from what we're doing.
Yeah, you got to
right
mute.
now.
Yeah.
Did that make you like judder around this screen like the the Weeping Angels from Doctor Who? Blink and you change a little bit.
Yeah, it did. So I guess the point is if we see questions in the Facebook chat, we probably need to address them.
So I can see it. I've got it rolling on my screen, so I'm good.
I'm going to pull it up and just mute it.
Yeah. Anyway, so talking about world building, I kind of want to go over maybe some. I mean, we all know what world building is, right? And I think in our realm, science fiction and fantasy, it's one of the key things to any good book, any book rather, when you're talking about fantasy and science fiction, because you've actually got to create a new world. You can't just it's different.
You have to world build any
technologies and right, and so
a little bit.
There are good ways and bad ways to do it. You know, maybe we can talk about a couple examples and kind of work through it there. Since I'm reading Peter F. Hamilton's new book Salvation, I kind of want to talk about like heavy like fronted like big learning curve type world buildings, and then maybe we can break into like smaller learning curves or different ways of doing it. But if you've never read Peter F. Hamilton, if you like space opera in any way, you need to read Peter F. Hamilton, because he's phenomenal at his world building. He's phenomenal at space opera, but he is a huge learning curve. So like a lot of people say they don't like reading science fiction and fantasy because they don't get it. Well, Peter F. Hamilton would not be the person that I would ask them to read, because his theory on that is, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I'm going to use it so much in context that you're going to figure out what it is eventually.
Right.
And so when you read his books, he doesn't explain anything. He just, this is what it is. Because you wouldn't explain it to somebody in that world. Like a character would not explain their technology to another character in that world because they both already know it. Like they're both living it. So why would I need to explain this is a transporter beam and how it works? They already know. It's kind of
right.
like,
well, I mean, that's true for any good setting, though.
Right. And it's like me,
I'm not going to tell you how your cell phone works. I'm just going to tell you to call me.
Yeah, it's like me explaining to you what a car is. Like, you know what a car is. So I'm not going to sit here and explain it to you. So
you kind of have to let the reader sort of get it through osmosis kind of experience.
Right.
Yeah, with Peter F. Hamilton, though, like it's sort of he's very much an exponent of show, don't tell. He's massively so. Yeah. But and I don't think he tells us all in it, but probably where he has to sort of address where other writers would feed in a little bit of telling is that he shows literally everything. So especially, say, the Commonwealth saga, the first two, Pandora Star and Judas Unchained specifically, you know, he's got this whole interstellar empire that relies on, say, like this network of wormholes where trains go through and all that kind of thing. So he really hammers that home with like numerous examples of show that in action. Whereas perhaps another, I wouldn't say lesser writer, because, you know, they're different techniques, but another writer will maybe show it once and then sort of like give a little bit of tell around it. Whereas Peter F. Hamilton's like show. Right, you got that? You figured out how that works? Brilliant.
Well, I'll be honest with you.
Move on with the story.
Yeah.
I didn't know who the guy was until I saw him on the interview list. So I just downloaded one of his audiobooks. Which one you get it? I think it's the very first. I actually went back to like the 90s and got the very first Greg.
The Greg Mendel series.
Mendelson, yeah. And I've started listening to it. And it's exactly that, because right out of the gate with that book, he starts talking about the fancy glider wing and all this stuff. But he doesn't really, there's no explanation. It's just, this is what it is. This is how it works. And you see how it works by him actually using it, not through any kind of expository explanation or anything. But I see very much what you're saying about him. He just sort of shows it to you and says, all right, this is it. Dive in, figure it out as you go.
And so the Greg Mandel series isn't strictly space opera, but it is, you're absolutely right. You get a taste of his world building. That's actually really good, probably, that you started with that, because that is a very, it's a very small sample, like
snapshot.
Yeah. Because if you, for instance, if you read Pandora's Star, the book that Ralph mentioned, Pandora's Star is enormous. Like Pandora's Star and Judas Unchained are enormous books, and there's so much going on that it without really knowing you're getting into a Peter F. Hamilton book, it might just be like, this is too much, I'm done. So
right.
But anyway, that type of world building, like Ralph says, he hammers it into you over and over and over again, and so by the time you're halfway through the book, you don't even have to think about what they're talking about. Like, because for instance, in Pandora's Star and Judas Unchained, he calls computers arrays, but he never comes out and says, we just started calling computers arrays. He just says arrays.
You figure it out by context.
Yeah, and then by context, you kind of glean what he's saying and moving from there. The thing that maybe is,
it takes a lot of courage to do that.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. The thing that's kind of a negative with his world building is that he is a huge, like, heavy world building. Like, and some of the world building that he has really doesn't affect the story. So it's kind of it's like one, like, end of the spectrum where it's just like, it's so much. Why do we need all that? But some people
but I think that's also a genre thing too. I mean, world building can be very specific to the genre you're writing in.
Right.
If you're writing epic space opera or epic fantasy, those readers want that deep world building. They want to know the history and that kind of thing. But if you're just writing like a thriller, Well, you just might mention this world, this kind of subculture within the modern world that the thing deals with without going into all the deep history and stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, so for the kind of stuff that obviously Hamilton writes, you know, it's kind of like the frickin' George R.R. Martin of the space opera realm. You know, you want that huge galactic feeling to the setting, because that's what those readers expect.
Well, yeah, with Peter F. Hamilton, I was supposed to say you get this sort of like huge, expansive galactic feeling, but then you get sort of like quite a focused, deep feeling about each specific subset. One of them, I think, probably one of my favourite, and I'll even go so far as to say it's probably the starter novel for Peter F. Hamilton is Great North Road, which kind of gives both aspects to it. So like Great North Road, sort of like a little bit of synopsis. It's sort of like a kind of whodunit murder mystery set in Newcastle, set in the UK, but also there's implications which spread across the entire galaxy as well. But I remember there's one bit in particular. There's a whole kind of criminal investigation side, because the city is still a functional city. It still feels like a functional city. So you've got the detective in charge of the investigation aspects of the story, and there was a whole like kind of plot device which went on, I'd say, for probably the length of your average size novel, where they're trying to piece together every aspect of this crime, which involved, as I recall, you probably correct me because I know you're much more deeply into it, Josh, than perhaps I am, but like where they're piecing together the movements of the taxis and they're getting all the CCTV cameras and everything like that. And then, which is basically a means by which he paints this whole city out in perfect detail. That investigation strand just grinds to a halt. The only purpose of that investigation strand was to be able to sort of like say, right, I've completely explained this whole city to you now. Now I'm going to tell the story in it.
Right.
And
well, and that's one of the in his newest book, Salvation, there's almost a whole chapter of them kind of working out a problem. Basically, an incident happened. It's an accident or whatever that happened, and it's just a whole chapter of them figuring out how they're going to solve this deal, and he's doing it for a reason. He's kind of showing character motivation and also world building at the same time. But that huge length of time, that what happens in that chapter, it's just huge. It's massive world building, and some people don't like that. Some people, and you mentioned George R.R. Martin. George Martin does it, but you like the massive world that he has, you only get in little bits. Right. Like if you actually, if you read, like we know it because we know the whole series, right? But if you're reading the book like from the beginning and you've never read it before, then you don't know who Rhaegar is. You don't know who Lyanna is. You don't know any of these things, and so you get little snippets along the way.
Has some interesting. Martin has some interesting devices that he puts into the culture, like "Come into my castle," and some of those games that the kids play, and some things that allow them to recite like the names of all the lords and pulling the banners, which helps. It's a information delivery device within the world building.
Right. See, I've always thought that's the smartest way to do your world building, at least in the sense that because you say world building to me, I think about the world you're creating from the writer perspective, and how you present that world to the reader is a different thing.
Yes.
And I've always thought that from what you're telling, and from what I remember of the few books in the Song of Ice and Fire that I've read, I've always thought Martin's way of doing it is the smart way to do it. It's the way I've always tried to do it, and that is you understand the world as a whole, but you present it to the reader from the perspective of whatever character you're focused on and their immediate surroundings.
Right.
So you know what, say, kingdom they're in and what room they're in, and you don't mention the war that's 1,000 miles away or anything like that, unless it somehow affects that character directly. And then you gradually let this world filter out to the reader over the course of the entire novel.
But you might want to know that war exists. You just don't put it in.
Right. Maybe you see a newscast or something, just something that suggests that it's out there.
And kind of what I was getting to is like the writer should know that wars happen.
Exactly.
There's a rule. I heard Patrick Rothfuss speak at a conference once, and he said that he puts in 4% of the details he knows about his world go into the actual story. So 96% of is held back, only 4% going.
Yeah,
that's all.
The writer should always know more than the reader. Always.
Yes.
But I also think that weight of untold history can add immeasurably to to a book. I mean, I'm sort of thinking specifically of like one of the friends of our show, Joshua James's Lucky Marines. And the opening specifically, I remember, it's sort of relatively sort of simplistic in terms of what's happening directly to the characters. It's sort of like they're dropping through an atmosphere, but like little hints of what they're saying, what they're discussing, and what they're viewing tells of a greater, wider, sweeping universe out there. And it gave that whole sort of piece such a weight of untold history, which I think is sometimes sort of difficult for some people to get across, or perhaps even neglected by some readers. Some writers, we just want to tell this particular thing. I ain't really worked out anything else, but some writers or genre, sorry, not genres, IPs, intellectual properties have worked out. So another good example is Games Workshop. I'm not a massive reader of Games Workshop, although I used to play as a kid, and I sort of have some sort of passing sort of knowledge of it. But that any story that's told in that has such a massive sweeping vista behind it. Yeah,
the whole Warhammer thing.
Yeah,
huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's other ones like that. I think last interview or the interview before, Josh, you were mentioning having read the World of Warcraft novel.
Yes.
And how that tied into, and perhaps that was sort of like, I wouldn't go so far as to say it done badly, but done it ultra targeted. Because
absolutely.
that meant quite a lot to you, didn't it? But you'd fully acknowledge that if you hadn't played World of Warcraft, you'd be like, "What the hell's going on?" Yeah,
right, exactly. Well, and that's one of the key things you need to understand when you're, for on Chuck's point, world building is an author-centric deal. Presenting it to the reader is completely something else. So when we're talking about world building, in essence, in effect for this show, we're talking about both, right? Creating the world and then presenting it to the reader, and then how you're doing that effectively. And you're absolutely right with the Warcraft novel. If I hadn't played the game or I didn't have any context in about the world or anything, the book really would have not done anything for me at all. It wouldn't have been entertaining. It wouldn't have been intriguing. I wouldn't have continued reading it because there just wasn't anything in the book that really drew me in and was like, "Oh, this is a really good book." The only reason I finished it was because I already knew some of the lore, and some of the events in the book affect locations in the game that you can actually go and see. So I was curious about that. So I want to get into kind of how we some really good ways to kind of throw in some world building, and then maybe some bad ways to start to do world building. Before we do that, I want to talk about the show sponsor real quick. And check this out, guys. This is gonna be really cool. Check this out. Ready for this? I'm
checking out as you speak.
I've got an overlay.
Checking.
I've got an overlay that you can see right now. Hopefully. And
it'll show up on the Facebook side and not the.
Yep, it's on the Facebook side, and you should see it here in a couple seconds. But anyway, this week's sponsor is Psychonautz by Gentry, Race, and Justin Sloan. Alien tech, magic systems, leveling up, and space dragons, all set to the backdrop of fan-fueled space marine adventure. When Marine badass Nathan Collins finds that their newly terraformed planet is under direct threat, he takes it upon himself to corral the colonists. He has his hardcore brother at his side, but it's not enough. That's when the new alien tech exosuit comes into play. With the ability to thought manifest weapons with new levels of badassery combined with Nathan's never back down conviction, humanity might just stand a chance. Colonizing outer planets in preparation for a defense against an alien invasion, the universe's fate is at stake.
At stake.
There's also a warning contains adult situations in language, which I guess we have to put in novels now. But that is by that is by Gentry Race and Justin Sloan. I'm hopefully gonna put it in the
Did
chat.
we put a warning in this show?
That's actually kind of a neat cover. I don't know. There's something
neat.
about that. I find it appealing.
At first I was like, what? And then I looked at it. I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty cool. If you really look at it, it's pretty.
It's a pretty neat cover, I think.
It is kind of neat. I like it.
The only problem I had, and I'll tell an interesting story about this because it pertains to most of our audiences, publishers, is one, the Psychonautz. I didn't realize that was one word at first, but when I was looking for it when it first came out, you couldn't find it on Amazon.
Right.
And this apparently can happen, but the authors contacted Amazon. They're like, nope, your book's fine. But for like a day or two, you couldn't search for it. You couldn't find it in a search. Even if you had the exact title, it wouldn't find it. And so that's, they obviously overcame it because now I search and I can find it. It's doing well. But that would be soul crushing if that was your first book and you put it out there and it's impossible to find.
Yep,
but things happen. What do? You just keep going.
So anyway, I'm glad that I have overlays back. Hey.
Yeah, actually, I see the keystroke medium one too. That's nice.
Ah, yes, that was a sneaky one. So let's talk about a little bit of how you seed world buildings into your story and how to make. Because I think the worst example you can do a world building and then presenting it to the reader is obviously info dumping, right? Like, but you start your book with, "This is what happened."
Or as you know, Joe.
Yeah,
the maid butler.
So there's two kinds of info dumping. There's one where you're info dumping in the narrative, which is basically, this is the last 300 years since humanity has gone to the stars. Blah 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 blah. There's 3 pages of it. No one cares because it doesn't affect the story. Don't do that, for the love of God. I don't know. See, this is crazy. We're in 2018. People have been saying for years, don't info dump, and people still info dump. So please don't info dump. The second is info dumping through dialogue. It's a trick,
which is more annoying.
It's extremely more annoying. If you're going to info dump, just info dump. Don't put it in the dialogue.
Right.
I hate that. Especially, like you just said, especially when it's like, as you know, this is this. So
I've often thought I wanted to write a scene where someone would say, "As you know, Joe, da 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 da," and then Joe goes, "Yeah, I fucking know. Why'd you tell me all that?"
Right.
Yeah. Are you totally high? Are you drunk?
What are you on, man?
And why do you keep calling me Joe? My name's not Joe. What the hell's wrong? You're obviously.
My name's Sarah.
So and you guys might have different. You guys might have different opinions about how you like your world building presented. But when I like world building is, and the way I do it is, if it affects what's going around the characters at that specific time, then we can do something with world building. For instance, there's an element in Edge of Valor. One of the pieces of technology is there's a computer. It's not a port, but it's basically a computer link in the back of their hand. It's basically surgically implanted. It's basically how they communicate. It's their security pass. It's their ID. It's their money. It's all that stuff, right? It's in there. They use it for pretty much everything. But I don't go out of my way to say this thing that they're using does everything that you would, like your cell phone, your wallet, and all that stuff. What I do say is, for instance, a character swiped the back of their hand against the security pass and the door clicked open, so the reader gets, okay, there's something in their hand. Or if they get like an incoming call, they'll tap their hand and that will allow them to talk.
Showing,
but yeah, it's
right,
showing. But it's action-based information delivery.
Right, but if I were to present it as an info dump, basically it would go something like this. And the character was sitting on the baseball field. He wasn't looking at his hand, which also contained a wallet and a phone and a security pass and all that stuff. I wouldn't do that because that's info dumping, and it doesn't affect him sitting in a chair watching a baseball game.
Or like you do it in dialogue and say, "Hey, Josh, how can you keep looking at your hand? Is your phone in the back of your hand not working?"
Right, exactly.
But there are stealthy ways.
Yeah,
go ahead,
just looking at sort of like an example of how. This would need to be utterly neatened up, but thinking about how you could get across all that, showing it without necessarily info dumping it, would be like your character sort of like turns the back of his hand to his face, and like the little sort of screen or whatever it is, or whatever format it looks like. Right. He scrolls through, and he scrolled through his bank, his phone, his connections, and he found the app that he wanted, and he clicked on it. That might be sort of like a more sort of subtle way. As I say, it would have to be neatened up over what I've just said. Yeah. But that would like kind of communicate that it's got all that functionality without necessarily you having to explain it.
Right.
Yes, but that would just be sort of one aspect, or the other one would be just completely. You just almost assume knowledge of the reader. Which is something you've got to be careful of, because sometimes it does blow back on you. Someone like Peter F. Hamilton, as we mentioned earlier, can get away with it because he hammers it home over the course of basically much of his 300,000 word novel is like 200,000 words of it tends to be a primer for the 100,000 words, which is a story.
Right.
So it's got to be carefully done.
So my next question would be, so let's just say, for instance, you have something that happened in your world or in your story before the story took place that you're telling, and it's cool, and maybe it affects the story, maybe it doesn't, maybe it's just something cool that you created in your world building and you absolutely have to have it in your story, but it takes place 50 years before your story took place. How do you thread that into your story, and do you? So if you absolutely have to, I would say do it the way that Martin does his backstory or his history, is that if some element of that story is pertinent to what the characters are doing, maybe seed that in a little bit. If you're having a conversation about a battle plan or something, and there was a battle that happened 50 years ago that maybe there's some reference that you can pull out of there, and the characters are aware of it. So like, well, you remember back at Tashi Station, that didn't work, but you don't actually go into saying everything that happened at Tashi Station. You just use that little bit, and then if something else happens later on the story that also reverts back to Tashi Station, then you can bring up the other aspect of that. And the cool
good way is to have somebody who's obviously ignorant of the fact. If you're going to have a character explain something, they need to be talking to somebody who doesn't know and would never logically know that information. Then it's a little more reasonable that they would talk about it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and even then, they need to explain it in such a way that they're not presenting obvious information as a basis for what they're saying.
Right. Well, and that's like, if you have characters that should be both aware of what happened, you can use the whole that didn't work. You remember that didn't work back there, right?
Right.
And then the other character goes like, yeah, I know, blah, 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 blah. But you don't have to go into it because the two characters know it. And if it's something interesting that you want to present to the reader, then you just find different portions of it that could be pertinent later in the story and kind of seed it in again.
There's a book called Self-Editing for Fiction Writers, and they talk about what they call ROE is one of their mantras, and it stands for RUE, resist the urge to explain.
Right.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times you're explaining stuff that doesn't need to be explained. You just go on and people will figure it out or they won't figure it out. If they're emotionally engaged with the stories, then they will continue to follow those characters.
Yeah.
Well, one of the challenges I've got in like my new project, the Great War, one was just very briefly, it mirrors the Second World War, but in a military science fiction environment. But implicitly, it covers the Second World War, and that's what I brought into a military science fiction environment. and that implies there was a first World War or first Galactic War that happened before that. Like many of the senior officers who are involved in the Second Galactic War, the Great War that we're covering in this story, were veterans from that First World War and the Galactic War, and they've kind of got sort of their experience base and their preconceptions and how they should deal with it and the dogmas they built up through that. And it's kind of like I've resisted the urge to sort of really delve back into it beyond sort of them mentioning or sort of like seeing the reactions of it beyond sort of like how it would form their opinions about how they should deal with the new situation. So, for example, like, you know, kind of you got people like the infantry guys and sort of some of the senior ones are like, well, you know, we either do or don't want to get into sort of like trench style warfare because of our experiences before, like, you know, and then there were in the First World War, there were like viable reasons as to why that was the best way of dealing with things. Not in my opinion, but the viable reason for them.
Right.
And then, but you know, from the flip side, you got the other guys who said that's a fucking stupid idea. We don't ever want to send our guys into that kind of environment again. And so they're kind of having these debates, but I don't want to go into it too much detail for two reasons. One, because of the reasons we've said, it's back material, and you know these guys all know this stuff. When they're having these debates, they know the actual history. They're just dealing with the repercussions, the pros and cons of like dealing with a tactical or strategic situation in that regards. But the second reason, authorially, you know, I might want to go back, and that might be a prequel series that I want to dive into and deal with at a later date. So, you know, there are some good reasons which aren't, you know, again, like to use those words, tactical and strategic. Tactical within within the confines of the book you're dealing with, but strategic. You know, maybe you want to hold off on that stuff because, you know, some people like prequels, other people hate them, but you know, maybe you're losing out on the opportunity to tell that story. But you want to keep it a little bit open, so you still got that sense of peril, and you still got the sense of, you know, people don't quite know exactly what happened there. So tell that, you know, you don't want to tell that story specifically.
One of the interesting things I think, one of the more creative things that I've seen an author do when it comes to, backstory, is he would create either origin stories or like if a character had an interesting event that happened in his life that didn't have anything to do with what the main story was about. Basically what he would do is he would write short stories about those events. And in his book, this is David S's, we've had him on the show a couple times.
Yeah.
In his book, he would put footnotes in the narrative. And so in an ebook, on a footnote, it just pops up on whatever word you put it on, right? So you click on that footnote, and basically it's a link to the short story. And it says, if you want to find out more about that story, if that's interesting to you, go here and you can read the short story. And there were just free short stories on his website. You could go there on his website and read it. But at that time, he's not padding the book with all these things that don't have anything to do with the actual narrative about what's going on. And I don't know how successful he was in that. I don't know how many people liked it. I read his first book, and then I got obviously pulled into a whole bunch of other books that I never have enough time to read. But that was a very unique way to do backstory and world building, because world building is not just the world, it's characters too. It's
everything,
yeah. So I thought that was neat. So that's
Lauren had a question too. I don't want to forget it. So go on.
So yeah, Lauren says, how important is originality to world building? How can it be a strength or weakness in a novel? So originality, well, I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, right? That's the old mantra. But coming up with new ways to present things, like for instance, we'll talk about it again because he's going to be on the show next week, and we've already spent a lot of the episode talking about Peter F. Hamilton. But in Pandora's Star and Judas Unchained, in the Commonwealth universe, he uses wormholes, right, or wormhole generators. Well, it's usually common in science fiction and military science fiction. If you're using a wormhole or wormhole generator, you're in space. And you go through that wormhole, or you go through that wormhole generator with a spaceship, right? in his universe, he uses trains. And so the wormholes are on the planets, they're on the surface of the planet, and they're open constantly. And you go through them in trains, and there's a massive transit system that is set up around these planet-based wormholes, and it's
they're like stargates.
They're like huge nuclear trains.
Yeah,
and the trains are these massive trains, so they can move a lot of stuff.
But these wormholes are like, he calls them zero width wormholes, and so you could basically just step through it, and you're in the other place. There's no there's no travel.
Didn't they do something like that in Hyperion? Where like you could step out of a room and on one planet and your house could be spread out over a whole planet.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So that's not original, but I mean
but it's about the spin.
It's about the spin on it,
twist.
right? So
his version of it is
he took trains and did it. So I don't know that originality is a bad thing. I don't know how original you're going to be. I mean, Star Wars created lightsabers, and that was original for them, but.
Yeah, I think the big thing with originality is that...
I was going to bring that up. There was one of the characters...
Uh-oh.
Is he there? There he is. I see him.
I think originality...
Did we lose Raph?
If originality draws attention to itself, it becomes a
exactly what I was going to say. I think originality is fine as long as the reader doesn't see the writer trying to be original. You know, it's got to be a subtle level. It's just about a twist or a spin. It's just enough for the reader to go, "Oh, that's cool," without going, he's trying too hard. You know,
you feel it rather than see it.
Exactly. Good way to put it, Scott.
Well, yeah. And so, like, you know, warships. Can you do an original space warship? I mean, you just look at the different things and look at what kind of technology can you add to make it original, or what type of aspect in the story makes it original. That I think that, like you said, Scott, if you are trying to be original just for the sake of being original, you're probably gonna miss the mark at some point.
That's it. There's some weird distortion.
Somebody just
that sounded desperate, didn't it?
He just sounded like some old guy with a cane,
it sounded like Point Break fell off a cliff.
Get off my lawn!
Oh God, that was hilarious.
Are they locked up again? Are they locked up, Raph? I think Raph's locked up again.
I think Raph's locked up pretty bad. God, that was awesome.
I'm gonna find that soundbite later and just replay the soundbite over.
Oh, that's our new show opening right there.
It's like the guy that's oiled up on Family Guy. Goodbye, America.
That's good.
Raph, you locked up, so I don't know what we missed.
Am I?
You were there for a second.
I don't know what's wrong with your stuff, Raph, but
Hello.
Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible.
Hello.
I think
that was a whole word.
Oh,
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible. Horrible, Raph.
Oh man.
What do you
Sounds like he's so drunk he can't talk.
Yeah.
That could be true.
I think we're gonna have to mute Raph for the rest of this episode because I can't take the drunk grandpa that somebody's beating
drunk
in the
internet.
It sounds like somebody's beating Ralph's grandpa in a back alley.
Am I here or not?
Oh, there you are.
That was pretty clear. That was better.
No, I've been watching.
Watching us cut up.
Oh my God, that was awesome.
So yeah, he's still kind of cracking up a little bit, but going back to like the bad world building that we were talking about earlier, it doesn't have to be at the beginning of the book either. Like if you get to info dumping on something that you really don't need to info dump about, like Scott, you were like you want to know everything in your world, but put 4% in it. Is it Patrick Rothfuss that did the currency for all of his? So he created a currency for like the past 5,000 years on this world or whatever. Like they would just they have different currencies, and he never used any of it.
he knew down, because he's into coins apparently, but he knew out of date. He said for the world that he built, he knew out of date currency that hadn't been used for 100 years, and he knew that.
Yeah.
But he didn't put it in the story.
Well, see, that's smart though, because I've known plenty of guys, especially since I'm a crossover from gaming, who their whole deal was world building.
Yeah,
that was their creative outlet. They didn't give a shit about telling stories, but they wanted to build these big, intricate worlds with long histories, and they would do stuff like that. I know I've told this story 100 times about the guy who did the sailing knots and tried to pass it off in the writing group, But he as much shit as we gave him about it, he knew that stuff down to the details.
Speaking.
You guys remember Max Headroom? That's
I remember Max Headroom. Do you remember Max Headroom? Yeah.
I think when it really comes down to world building, I think the number one thing to think about when you're writing and when you're presenting information to the reader is if you don't tell the reader that, are they still going to get your story?
Right.
If you don't,
go ahead, Scott.
I would say what I was asking, kind of a follow up to what you're saying right now, Josh, is what's the minimum? Or like maybe some core fundamentals that need to go into every world building that people are going to need. And
right. So if you don't explain it, is it going to change your story? So let's just say if you want to put in this history from 50 years ago in your book and you want to seed it in different scenes and you want to use it, or you want to spend a couple of pages talking about this incident that happened 50 years ago, does it affect your story or your characters? Because like we said, world building is characters and story. So if the incident that happened 50 years ago, if you just think it's cool, don't put it in your story. But if it affects the way, like, what your character is doing or how they feel about a certain thing that's happening in the book right now, then it could be useful. You need to think about that stuff. The number one thing I don't like about world building and that I don't like about science fiction and fantasy books that I've read recently is you start the book or the story with information that you think is cool, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the story.
Right.
Or you get into the story and you have a great opening, and then you go through 2 or 3 chapters of world building that has absolutely nothing to do with the story. So my whole thing is I do minimums, like George Martin does. Minimum. If it is not completely necessary to the scene or the character or setting up something else in your book later, leave it out. It does not need to be in the story. You might think it's cool. Some of your readers might think it's cool. There are readers that read books specifically for world building aspects, but that is not the majority of readers. So if it doesn't affect your story and it doesn't affect the characters, just leave it out. Don't put it in.
But some things are necessary. So like if you are writing fantasy, right, and you're building a world, you have to have some sort of framework for magic.
Sure.
And there's different levels of how much and how you present that.
Sure, absolutely. But that stuff's necessary for your story.
Yeah, and that I think you sum it up nicely when you say character, because for me, the way I like to do it, the way I enjoy reading, is it always comes back to that character. Mm-hmm. If there's a piece of information that's relevant to what's happening to that character, whether someone's presenting it to the character or it's something they're remembering, that's when you want to bring up that, oh yeah, I remember back I was reading 50 years ago they did X, and that I could do that now to get myself out of this snake pit or whatever, Right. So it really comes down to what's relevant to the scene.
Yep.
But again, the writer should already know all this stuff.
Yep.
But it should always come back to the character in the scene, because that is who the reader is associating with and sympathizing with if you're doing it right. So just present what that character needs to know to deal with whatever they're dealing with, and just sort of seed that through the whole book, and I think that's the best way to do it.
And one of the things you've got to consider as well, you're designing your character to tell the story that you want to tell. So one of the things I would consider or posit would be, could you imagine a first-person story told from the point of view of MacGyver?
Oh my gosh, no. I'll be honest with you. I hate writing characters who are really smarter than me. like Sherlock Holmes, because my last book had a guy in there like that. And I understand that's why Arthur Conan Doyle gave Sherlock Holmes a Watson, because all of the Holmes stories are told from Watson's point of view, because who the hell could write like Holmes?
Yeah.
I mean,
right,
you know,
have to be that guy.
Point of view.
Heroin addict autistic.
Something. I don't know.
Or from like some sort of like the MacGyver example would be like some guy who can like just looks at a machine, and he like a first person for him from that perspective would be him like designing whatever device he needs to overcome that situation. And it probably, you got to think that would probably be something you'd want to design another character to look at him from the outside.
And so, what the hell are you doing, man?
Yeah.
Well, the chocolate arsenal. That's weird.
I don't understand how the chewing gum's going to blow open the iron door. How's that work?
But the other cool thing about having the Watson character and Holmes is, if you make Holmes the POV character, it's not a crazy mystery to the reader how he works this stuff out. So the other cool thing about that POV aspect is, when Holmes has his revelations, the reader, sometimes it takes them a minute to catch up to what he's figured out in his own head. And so that discovery for the reader, when it comes, like, so maybe he makes the connection and then he runs off because he's eccentric like that, right? He's like, oh, and then he runs off, and Watson's like, what the hell, dude? Like, and then he's chasing after him. Well, then when the reader gets it and they make that connection, and then they see how Sherlock made that connection before they did, and they're like, oh God, he's such a smart guy. Of course he would have figured it out that way.
When it's really done well, because now we're getting into mysteries and world building for them, but when it's really done well, the reader will see how he explains it and go, oh shit, I remember reading that back on page 10.
Absolutely.
That was, it's seeded, those clues are seeded in nicely in the story. So, but every genre has world building. I think that's an important point too. This is a huge topic.
Huge.
It really is.
I don't think that we'll be able to cover, I mean, we could talk about it for hours and hours talking about.
Yeah, we really could.
So let's go around the table and say, and have each person tell, what's the first thing you do when you're building a world? It's like one thing.
Do you want to go first?
Start?
Yeah, you start.
Well, I usually, if I'm going to build, I usually don't even world build. I usually start with the characters. But when I'm building a world, I always start with a map. I just start with the map because I think a lot of, especially in fantasy and genres that are world building intensive, rely on maps, and they matter. Like if you read the Game of Thrones, if you look at the geography of that world, it matters to the story, because they got to get past the twins. They got to get through the fingers, all of those things. They got to move those armies through these impossible areas. And that changes everything about they do, and the impossible decisions they have to make, and the bad marriages and the murders and all that wouldn't happen if they didn't have to get to that narrow point in the geography.
Right.
So I start with the map.
Ralph, you're next.
Building.
Well, Ralph might not be here. Chuck, you're next. I'll go last.
Okay. I typically, when I'm strictly thinking I tend to start with a character, but I just have the idea for the character, and I know I need to set that character in a world. So when I look at the world, if I'm talking about fantasy, I typically start with a question. Like in Master of Hounds, when I started thinking about the setting, I'm like, what if there was other dimensions, and you could have things from those dimensions come over here and give people magic, but there was magic in our dimension that was a lot harder to access. And off of that question, I start building a history, and then I think about how that history would affect the modern world, but then whether or not it would be people would be keeping it secret, whether or not people would be like, it would be an open thing, and I always start with that what if question, and then sort of build out from that as to how it would affect the setting that I'm working in. It's a little different if you're working like an epic fantasy, but for like the urban fantasy that I typically write, that's sort of where I come from, that what if this thing was true kind of question, and how would it affect history, in the world we live in.
That's a good place to start.
So I'm kind of in the same boat as you, and I'll talk about with Terra Nova, there was some world building, but a lot of that was done already through Richard and the Ember War, so I didn't have to do anything from scratch. It was already there. And so when I'm talking about world building for me specifically, I'll use Edge of Valor because it's the one that I'm working on now. And the way that I world built that is that I had the idea for the story, which is just a rescue mission gone wrong. And I knew that I wanted it in a science fiction setting, military science fiction. And so that I just started coming up with different things that I could use. But I didn't really start my world building, and like you said, it's going to affect the story, like magic systems or whatever. It's the same thing with technology. So when I'm creating the story and I'm thinking about different technologies to put in that story, I'm thinking about how that technology is going to affect the story. And so all of that, I take world building in small, like space travel for me is not like a world building thing. Like, I'm like, we have to have space travel. The only aspect of space travel that I think of when it comes to world building is time. How long is it going to take from to get there to there? I don't really care how it happens, unless that affects the actual story. Usually for me, it doesn't. So for me, it's either like warp or hyperdrive or whatever. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's all the same thing. That's how we get from point A to point B. But for instance, with the hand link, there are certain aspects of the story that will be affected by that piece of technology. So I have to think about how that affects the narrative and how that affects the rest of the story. But I take it in small chunks. I take it as the story goes. And I focus on the story first. And then I think of all the little other pieces of technology that might change how that affects just little things. And then I'll go back and tweak them later. Whereas I used to be like, I used to just sit down and go, what do I want in my world? And just start slamming out. Like, I remember when I was younger talking about military science fiction, I remember like sitting down and designing fleets of warships. And like I would have cruisers and destroyers and fighters and classes and how many people were on that ship and what kind of guns they would have. And just sit down for hours and just design that stuff. And it was fun, but did I write the book? No. And so now when I sit down and do it, like I'll have this in my mind. Yeah, they're going to have destroyers. Yeah, they're going to have fighters, blah, blah, blah. But I don't need to know what type of engine they have, what type of weapons they have until I get to that point in the story. And then I'll kind of develop that stuff as it goes.
That brings up an interesting point we might want to also address is when world building is too much. Mm-hmm. Or what is the minimum amount you need to do? Those are two topics we could talk. I don't know if we can get into that, but
we may have to do a part 2 on this topic.
I'd like to change my answer because your guys' answers were both way more awesome than mine. Although I do one of the things, it's not so much world building, but it kind of is sometimes I like to get a little bit of a hedge fund of names because when I'm really cruising, I run into a name. And I think names are very important because they characterize. Yeah. And so and Josh laughs at my name choosing all the time because they're always like some crazy stuff. Like,
do you guys ever just write like in big letters, name this guy and just keep going? That, yeah. I do that a lot.
I did that this morning when I was doing my sprints. I needed a name for this dude's co-pilot. And so for like an hour, I still haven't named him yet, but for an hour this morning, I just kept writing co-pilot.
I've been working on the third Brace Cordova book, and I have yet to name the evil aliens, and I just keep writing alien name in all caps and just go on.
The name I'm using right now, which I'm pretty sure is going to get thrown out by my collaborator, is main character's name is Euron Marlborough. Is his name?
I like Marlborough.
Euron. I like Euron because it pops in my head, and I think of Euron Greyjoy.
Oh yeah, you're on Greyjoy.
Yep. And the reason I picked it one is because it's probably going to be replaced or eliminated, and it's easy to search for, to find, search, replace. But a lot of the other ones, they say, because I use the Richard Fox thing where I put the square bracket name, close square bracket to make it easy to make sure I find it later in the revisions.
Yep. We'll have to do a continuation of this, and I mean, this is why I like doing the roundtables because we get to kind of work through different issues and different topics, and it's always fun just to kind of talk about, because stuff you think about all the time, but you don't ever get to talk about. So it's
geeking out.
Oh yeah, geeking out. Yes, exactly. Geeking out. Keystroke.
Writer Geek Sound, or this could be Writer Geek Roundtables.
So we'll have to do kind of maybe a poll this week and see, did you guys like the Facebook presentation? Did you not like the Facebook presentation? Would you rather have it on YouTube? Is it a little easier to watch on Facebook? And I mean, while we were watching, we got several shares, several likes. So we've obviously got a lot of comments going on. So we'll throw up a poll or something in the group later.
I'm curious to watch the playback. Yeah, connection. If you have a few tech difficulties, then we could control really.
I do want to say that everybody watching the live feed, and hopefully when you catch this later, next week we will be going back to our 11 a.m. time just for next Monday, because Peter F. Hamilton's going to be on the show.
Oh, we are?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
So, yeah. Newsflash. So Peter F. Hamilton, obviously he lives in England. They're 5 hours ahead of us. So 5 or 6 hours ahead of us. So we didn't want him to be like up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So we're going to do it at 11, which is 5 or 6 his time. And we'll put a couple of reminders before we get there. But 11 a.m. Central, 10 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Central for next week's show with Peter F. Hamilton. And we'll probably end up doing that one on YouTube just because we don't want to mess anything up for the Facebook. And maybe it's something where if we have a guest, we'll do it on YouTube. And if we do a roundtable, maybe we'll do it on Facebook. We'll see. We'll just see how it works out. So it seems like...
We're innovators.
Yes, absolutely.
Innovating like mofos.
That's right.
I'll try to be on time for that one.
Yes, please be on time. That's all I ask. I don't ask much.
We're going to mark it down in your file, your personal
file.
file.
I know. There goes my raise.
Where did I put that personnel file at? It's
where is
somewhere. It's probably in the trash can.
We're talking about merit increases.
Yeah. And there's no union either, so don't try to go to your union about it. Everybody that hung out with us tonight on Facebook, thank you very much for hanging out with us. It was really fun talking about world building, and kind of fun seeing you guys' comments, even if they are delayed. So... yeah,
I feel bad that Ralph got nuked while he was on Mallorca.
No, but I'm gonna find that soundbite and replay it because that was hilarious.
That was hilarious. That whole.
I think he probably got hit by a paraglider.
All right, well, we're gonna sign off for tonight. Everybody, thanks for watching. Make sure you come back next week. We're gonna talk about some reading. We're gonna talk about some writing, and of course, everything in between, right here on Keystroke Medium. See ya.
Later, guys.